had some great colleagues, wonderful bosses. And then after a couple of years, moved to the DC area and worked at several Fortune 500 companies in the DC metro area, where I lived for about 30 years.
Uh-huh. It's funny. I didn't realize that you and I had maybe overlapped. I was in Palo Alto and then went to Washington also.
Oh, no way. Yeah, I loved Palo Alto, but it was just too far from my family in England. And being on the West Coast, I loved every minute of it.
Welcome to Sterling Insights, Stand Out and Supercharge Your Assets, the go-to podcast for financial advisors aiming to grow their assets under management, stand out in a crowded market, and retain assets nearly forever. Are you advising high net worth clients who own appreciated capital assets? Do you want to help them sell without losing a quarter, a third, or even more of their hard-earned profits to capital gains taxes? Then this podcast is tailored for you. Each episode brings you the latest strategies and expert advice from leading financial advisors, seasoned attorneys, and experienced CPAs. Learn how to maximize your clients' wealth, minimize their taxes, and supercharge your advisory practice with actionable insights. Join us on Sterling Insights, Stand Out and Supercharge Your Assets, where you'll gain the knowledge and tools to set yourself apart and achieve unparalleled success in wealth management. Subscribe now and empower your practice for a brighter, more prosperous future.
Welcome to Sterling Insights, Stand Out and Supercharge Your Assets. I'm your host, Roger Silk, and our guest today is Susan Chesson. Susan spent 20 years in corporate finance at Fortune 500 companies before making the switch to financial planning. Today, she uses the skills that she honed managing these multi-billion-dollar portfolios to offer sound financial advice and professional investment management. She joined Buckingham in 2017, and before that, Susan was a senior vice president and senior wealth advisor at Focus. Before she did that, she worked in corporate treasury, fixed income, and banking operations at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and as I understand it, Capital One. Susan holds a bachelor's degree in French and Russian literature from Oxford, and she also has an MBA from the University of Texas. And if that weren't enough, Susan is a CFP, a CPWA, and a wonderful person. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Roger. It's good to be here today.
We're very happy to have you. So I know you don't want to talk about your Oxford education, but I do want to kind of just ask you, it's not every day that I speak to an advisor who has an Oxford degree, A, and B, did that degree in literature, especially French and Russian literature. How did you make the transition from literature to finance? It's not an obvious one.
Yeah, that's a great question. It was actually very normal back in the 80s when I was at Oxford that you could study any subject that you wanted. And the expectation was that you would learn to study independently and to think on your feet. And no matter what your background, be it English, classics, modern languages, any other subject that you could study there, you would then be expected to follow whatever professional career that you chose. So I actually got offers from investment banks in London after I graduated with a French and Russian degree. Then I moved to the States, and it was clear that a liberal arts degree was going to get me nowhere fast. So I had to get an MBA to get back on track to where I originally intended to go.
Interesting. So you were working in London for a while. Is that when you were at the big non-finance companies, or was that?
No, I never worked in England other than babysitting and a paper round. I taught in France. I was an English assistant in a French high school for about a year during college. Other than that, I applied to the University of Texas, and it followed my heart. Basically, I was dating a guy who was going to law school in Texas. So we moved to UT Austin, and I did a master's degree in French, and then I was accepted into the business school and spent 2 years getting my MBA with a focus in finance. Yes, from there I moved to California right out of grad school, lived just south of San Francisco and worked in Palo Alto at Hewlett Packard for a couple of years. Had a fantastic experience there working in the corporate treasury department. Had some great colleagues, wonderful bosses. And then after a couple of years, moved to the DC area and worked at several Fortune 500 companies in the DC metro area where I lived for about 30 years.
I was in Palo Alto and then went to Washington also.
Oh, no way. I loved Palo Alto, but it was just too far from my family in England. And being on the West Coast, I loved every minute of it, but I could not afford to buy a house and had to schedule the phone calls with my family. It was really inconvenient. So we moved.
So you were at Fannie, Freddie, and Capital One?
Yes, and General Dynamics and the Federal Reserve Board.
Oh, cool. What'd you do at the Fed?
I worked in a data statistics area, collecting data on bank lending. I got there in fall of 2008, right before Lehman Brothers and the entire, the financial recession hit. So I was there in the heart of the theater of operations, and the financial world was just crumbling around me. It was a very exciting time to be at the Fed.
I'll bet. Yeah. So Freddie and Fannie and the Fed are all rather different from what you're doing now. And I have some feel for it because I was at the World Bank, which I was never at Freddie or Fannie, but I imagine that they have more similarities than differences.
Probably so. I started at Fannie back in the early 2000s, and effectively, we were printing money, borrowing inexpensively in the debt markets and buying mortgage-backed securities. And there was a positive spread, and life was wonderful. I left there, just got another job and moved on to something different, and then came back during the restatement where I saw Fannie and Freddie both in a very different light. So again, great experiences, wonderful colleagues, very, very different experiences from what I'm doing now. Early in my career, I was sitting in a cube managing billions of dollars, in my late 20s, believe it or not. Now I'm managing millions, but it feels so much more real because these are millions of dollars that belong to our clients. It's all that they have, and we have a very personal relationship with one another. And so it's a lot more meaningful and frankly, a lot more stressful than the corporate life.
I can really relate to that because I had a similar trajectory when I was at the World Bank in my late 20s, responsible for billions of dollars, but there were billions more where those came from, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't take it lightly. I certainly wasn't going to lose them, but it's not the same as, I've got $1 million. I trust you with it. What are you going to do with it? Make sure it's there for me because I don't want to run out before I die. It's a very different conversation.
So was there something that happened or you made a decision to go from big institutional finance to working directly with individuals?
Yeah, it took me, I don't know, 10, 12 years to make the switch. I was working at Fannie in the early 2000s, and I was managing the defined benefit and the defined contribution plans. And one of the executives, super bright guy, came over to my office one time, and he asked me about holding fixed income in his retirement account. Well, I'm 30 years old, and I look at him like he's crazy. Like, why would you put some asset that's not going to earn you very much in something that you want to live off after you quit working? And then I started researching it, and I started studying asset allocation and asset location and just reading about it in my spare time. I realized just how many smart people are in the working world who are not experts in finance, in wealth management. And there are so many tips and tricks that we learn when we take the certified financial planning education coursework that you don't realize when you're putting on your suit and driving into work and doing, working as an engineer or an attorney or whatever else it is you do. And so it opened up my eyes, and I realized that there's a huge opportunity here for people to serve successful entrepreneurs and professionals and to help them worry less about their money, lose less to sloppiness, perhaps missing tax forms or something like that, and really just optimize their financial picture. And so after that, I was dying to become a wealth advisor. And unfortunately, I was a single parent with a large mortgage, and it took me a good while to save up enough money to be able to step away for a while and take the coursework.
So you had to apply your own sauce to the goose first, huh?
I did, and I absolutely, I'm very glad that I waited as long as I did. I did start trying to study for it in the evenings, but with two little guys and a full-time job, I just couldn't put the energy into it that it required. So I'm glad that I self-funded a sabbatical and did it full time.
How much did the MBA in finance help, or you found that it didn't help as much as you had hoped it would?
I don't think it helped a lot. There, for sure, there's overlap with the investment components of the MBA course, and common sense that you learn and improving your spreadsheet capabilities, either through coursework or professional work, definitely paid off in spades. But there's a lot of other work involved. They say that the CFP designation is an inch deep and a mile wide.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to know about estate planning, about tax planning, about business entities, Social Security, retirement plans. There's insurance coverage. There are so many things that you don't learn in business school that I'd say, yeah, probably it was a huge help, but it didn't carry me over the finish line.
Would you say that the enforced rigor of graduate school was a good discipline to have in your?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I majored in college in French and Russian for sure, but I also spent an awful lot of time punting out on the Charwell or just traveling and having a good time. So I got to business school in the US, and I had not worked professionally. And so I was surrounded by people who'd come from consulting backgrounds or worked as engineers, and they were hardworking, smart people. And yeah, I really had to light a fire into myself to succeed there. I learned a lot about study skills in grad school.
Sometimes I think that's one of the main things that grad school does for people.
Oh, see, I thought I was the only slacker going into grad school. I'm so relieved to hear I'm not.
Yeah.
That was a lot of work.
Have you developed over the years maybe a financial planning philosophy? And if so, how would you describe it?
I'm not sure philosophy is a little grandiose, but I would say my financial planning style or my belief is that there is no one size fits all answer. If if I had to choose one, it would have to be so lame, it would be it depends. And so really my philosophy is just to pay close attention to what clients are asking. If their questions don't make sense to me, just to probe and to clarify until I understand what their goal really is, and then to reflect and share back what my thoughts are on what would meet their goals. So I think my philosophy is don't be Susie Orman like and give an answer that will sell out and make the best sellers, but honestly doesn't serve anybody well. But it's to listen and provide a bespoke response.
Do you find the most challenging part of many of the engagements is actually sitting with the client and getting the client to really dig into what does that client really want?
That depends. For some clients, just pinning them down, if they're busy professionals or busy professionals with young kids, just getting their attention for half an hour is a real challenge. But yes, understanding what goals are and listening, I would say the hardest skill to master as a wealth advisor is communication skills. If you can understand and explain in terms that make sense to your client, I think you can be a lot more successful than if you can run numbers and generate spreadsheets and master tax code. It's connecting the facts and figuring out what the opportunities are and connecting them to what makes sense to the client.
and maybe you can't answer this without talking about client matters that you don't want to talk about, but are there any examples that you can think of or types of situations where it was really the ability to get the client to communicate that was really where you added most of the value?
I think the greatest value that we add as wealth advisors, and I say we because it's not just me, it's my team as well, is spending time interacting with clients at a personal level, be it over a coffee or visiting them at their homes or having long phone calls or Zoom calls. And once you get to know somebody personally, then you can understand much more clearly what concerns or fears they may have. For example, you may have a client whose parent or grandparents did very poorly in the Depression, and maybe a family member was on Medicaid for a while. Well, they're going to be paranoid that the same thing might happen to them. You may have another client whose maybe mother died, father remarried, never did estate planning to make sure that the blended family was taken care of, died first, and all of his assets went to second wife and went to her kids. So thinking through issues like that and understanding what emotions are tied up with your clients, how do they feel about money? Frankly, it's really touchy-feely, and it's not how I naturally think about things, but understanding the relationship, the emotions associated with money, and the reasons for it helps us to tailor our advice and to be able to answer questions. I don't want to say before they come up because we don't want to put words in people's mouths, but to get a sense of where are you coming from, what's important.
Are there some things, Susan, that you've learned and that you realize, oh, I wish I would have known this all along?
Yeah, no, there have definitely been some ego crushing moments, if that's what you're asking. I think what I've learned over the years is that I'm always learning. And no matter how hard I study and how much I learn from my colleagues or from my clients, I'll never have all the answers. I've been so fortunate in the DC area to develop relationships with experts in other fields in accounting, estate planning, foundation management at Sterling. And that, I think, building that network and knowing where my expertise and competence should stop and where to address the question with a competent professional who specializes in a different field. I think that's something that I had no understanding of when I first started out. I thought, well, I'll take the CFP designation. Once I've got the CFP certification, I'll be a fully fledged wealth advisor. I'll do my 2 years of experience and I can do it all. That's not the case. The longer I work in the field, the more interesting, more complex clients I start to work with. And I realize more and more I need to turn to other experts to answer their questions. And then I'm playing much more of a coordination role. And frankly, I'm learning as much as the client is.
I think that's a very perspicuous answer. I can't think of a simpler word than that right this minute, but
I'm not sure how perspicuous and ego crushing go together, but we'll roll with it.
well, because the financial world is so complex, nobody can know even half of it, even just one thing like taxes. Nobody knows the whole tax code. There are people who spend their entire career specializing in, one number, one four-digit section of the tax code.
I've been really fortunate to have great mentors and colleagues and such a good network around me. And once we sold our practice to Buckingham back in 2017, I now have probably 200, 250 wealth advisor colleagues across the country that I can consult. So I don't always have to go outside the firm to get answers. And we all have very different experiences. And we've worked with different types of clients and solved different problems over the years. So it's a very collegial atmosphere. And I heavily rely on my colleagues sometimes for some of the more obscure stuff.
So I imagine that you are still discovering kind of new opportunities to help your clients in ways that maybe they weren't interested in or you didn't bring to their attention early on in the relationship. But Buckingham probably puts that on exponential.
We do have a lot of products and services, not in the salesy sense of the word, but we do have a lot of expertise in a lot of different fields. And even more broadly, not just within our firm, but I've attended conferences over the last couple of years, and I'm developing an interest in cross-border financial management. Now that is just a nasty web. Well, part of it stemmed from a client who grew up overseas and now is a US citizen. And then part of it is my father is older and a retired accountant in the UK. Eventually, I will inherit real estate and retirement assets in the UK. And it is really hard to figure out what is the tax impact. And much better I figure it out while he's alive and well and 100% with it than I'm kind of cramming at the end when it's an emergency. So I'm just starting to dabble in that masochistic area, but it's a real challenge and there's a lot to pick up. I don't think I'll ever be an expert there.
You're focusing on US, UK right now.
I am. Yes, because it's meaningful to me. And I'm realizing that if with a good background in wealth management, if it's challenging for me to find the experts in that field, then it's going to be almost impossible for the man on the street.
As I'm sure you're probably discovering that there's a lot of truth in Churchill's quip about one people divided by a common language.
Oh my gosh, no, absolutely. Yes. That's actually one of my party tricks. I like to test people to see how well they can pronounce English place names. It's not a good way to make friends, though.
What are some of the more interesting or head-scratching things that you've come across so far when looking at the UK compared to the US as you've been looking at this process?
The UK is very much a moving target. Every time they have a new budget, the tax code changes. I've been led to believe that it's going to just kind of pull the rug out from under me and I'm going to have to start over.
I'm going to change the direction a little bit. You were on the board of the Financial Planning Association. I bet that was quite an experience and you must have had some interesting episodes and things you learned from that.
I learned a lot from my colleagues at the Financial Planning Association. I served on the board for probably half a dozen years, and I actually focused on pro bono activities, which is not the main charge of the Financial Planning Association. That's much more of a networking and continuing education body. But I found that we have a ton of really well-educated, caring advisors in the DC metro area. Every year we would put on this pro bono program. We would fund it and we held it at GMU one time and Virginia Tech's extension outside Falls Church one time. We would just cram the rooms full of advisors who were volunteering their time. We would advertise it and people would come in with questions. We would have folks who could advise on debt consolidation. We'd have folks come in just looking for a free review of their tax return. And then we would have people really with problems like, I think I'm going to file for divorce. What do I need to take into consideration before I do that? How is it going to impact me? And just addressing financial planning questions that our clients can turn to us, but they're paying clients, right? I mean, if you work with a client who has somewhere between $1 million and $10 million in investable assets, we have a great relationship. We meet with them once or twice a year, more if necessary. We can address any and all questions that they have. If you don't have assets, you don't have a way to pay a financial advisor. And so the pro bono service that we did enabled anyone to walk in off the street and ask somebody who wasn't incentivized to sell them something they didn't need to just answer their questions honestly. So it was great. I really enjoyed some of the folks that I met through the Financial Planning Association. I went to the national conference and also to the national board conference a couple of times. Just a lot of very smart people who want to help their clients solve issues.
If someone comes to you and they don't have assets or they don't have enough, or they're interested for their young adult in their life, somebody who's just getting started out, who clearly doesn't have the ability to retain the help of somebody like you, are there books or materials or references that come to mind that you recommend to young people?
That's a really tough question because I firmly believe that there's no single answer for anybody. So I will start with live well within your means. Don't charge up your credit card and don't spend money you don't have. I don't offer any kind of books or other reference guides. I have on occasion sat down with kids' friends, anybody who will ask me, alumni associations. I've done this in public libraries before, and somebody will say, I'd just like to pick your brain on financial planning for somebody who is about to get married or about to buy a house or starting their first or second job. Should they invest in a Roth? Should they have a traditional 401k? Do they even know what a 401k is? What's a high yield savings account? Those kinds of questions. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any resource where you can get those questions answered. So I often put myself out there, and as I say, many a time, I can sit for an hour or two and just play stump the chump with me, and I'll answer your questions.
Susan, how do you, if you have a nice rounded definition, how would you define success?
I've thought a lot recently about that question because I've been thinking about it in terms of clients and for myself. In terms of a wealth advisor, success means understanding, knowing whether you have enough, whether you've made enough money, you've got enough money, you have enough time and other finite resources. Can you stop doing what you're doing, or can you modify your life so that it's more purposeful and more fulfilling? Now, that's a very kind of highfalutin philosophical answer to how do you define success, but it's not a number. I can walk away from my desk for a couple of weeks. I've got great colleagues who can back me up. I can visit my kids. I can visit my family. I can go explore. I can do whatever I want to do, come back energized and serve clients and continue doing what I do because I love doing what I do. So I feel successful. That's my own definition of success, and I'm very happy with it. I think that's a killer question, quite honestly, and I've wrestled with that a lot.
I think
How do
thoughtful.
you define success, Roger?
Well, technically, success is achieving your goals, right? That just kind of kicks the question to a different place, right?
Okay, but
And
okay, so
and so I think people in general have happy people. Most people want to be happy. Let's say that we agree with Aristotle that people want to be happy.
okay,
And I think for most people that means some combination of family, material comfort, which in our world translates into money or financial resources, health, and meaning.
yep, I agree. Health and purpose are huge.
And to some extent we can control some of those, and to other extent we can't.
Yes. Yeah.
But I guess I think success is having some idea of what you want in each of those domains, and there may be other domains. For some people it's spiritual or religious. People those aren't the only ones, right? But people will. I mean, everybody has to have at least a minimum amount of material.
Yeah, that's enough.
Or we won't be here, right? And you got to have the minimum amount of health, or you can't do anything. And but yeah, that's how I see it. And I think the more traditionally successful people are, in terms of, I think in our society, we tend to measure people mean how much money do you have. But what I find is the more people have of that, the more these other things matter.
See, I don't think you can manage, you can't measure success with money. I think money is very important to a lot of people, but I think honestly, success is knowing if you have enough to do what you want to do.
You said it perfectly.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of introspection and thought and measurement, really, to understand what your goals are And I don't think anybody can truly quantify their life goals because, as you point out, our health, our financial resource, everything is finite. But do you have enough that you're satisfied, that you're not frustrated every day? You get out of bed with a spring in your step because I'm going to do this, and it's a great day because that I think is success.
I hard to argue with that.
But not in a Pollyanna sense. I'm not going to be glad about absolutely everything. I have down moments too. I'm human.
So with all of your success, what would you say is your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge really is figuring out whether I should stay in the field that I'm in for the rest of my life, or what happens when I get bored. I have a horrible tendency to get bored and then go off and do something different. Right now, I still thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing, but my eyes have been opened just through working with clients to so many other fields. And I've got a lot of retired friends who go boating, go kayaking, read. I'm not a pickleball or a golfer, but there are just, I don't know. I'm not really sure where I'm headed next. But I got to go somewhere because I've always been on a path to somewhere, and I don't know where the next location is, next destination.
Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to share with our audience?
There is actually, and I think I alluded to it earlier, but I'm not a solo practitioner. And I am a consummate extrovert, and I get all of my energy and a lot of my thinking done when I interact with others. So I didn't prepare an Oscar acceptance speech, but I would like to give kudos to my colleagues at Buckingham and formerly Focus Wealth Management, because without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. No, I really value highly as I've mentioned earlier, the network of professionals that I've developed an affinity for and a closeness to. And I cannot thank enough the estate planning attorneys, the accountants, the colleagues who've spent time educating me on stuff that otherwise I wouldn't make it through the book because it's boring. I love having resources that I can go to who I can tailor my question, and they can narrow down the question to a specific part of the tax code or whatever we're addressing. Give me my answers and I can move on.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. And that's what's been such a great experience over the last several years since I left corporate finance and became a wealth advisor. I've built great relationships with clients, but I've built really strong relationships with other professionals who just become part of the team.
Super. And that's a perfect segue to where can people learn more about you and your team?
My bio is available on the Buckingham Strategic Wealth website. And you can also look up Susan Chesson on LinkedIn, and my bio is current there as well. So those are the two places, Buckingham Strategic Wealth or on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Susan. We really appreciate it. It was very interesting and fun.
No, thank you. This has been a blast. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Sterling Insights, Stand Out and Supercharge Your Assets, where we provide the info you need from successful leading financial advisors, lawyers, and CPAs. Your hosts, Roger and Catherine Silk, invite you to learn more about Sterling Foundation Management by visiting sterlingfoundations.com.